Anna sat at the grand oak dining table, her fingers resting on the cool surface as the aroma of roasted meat, buttered vegetables, and rich spices filled the air. The room buzzed with warmth and laughter. Her in-laws had a tradition: Sunday dinners, a time for the family to come together, share stories, and enjoy a home-cooked meal prepared by Helen, her mother-in-law. She had been part of these dinners since marrying Daniel a year ago. At first, she had been excited, eager to bond with his family, to become one of them. But excitement had faded into something else: fear. Because every time she ate at their house, she got sick. At first, she thought it was a coincidence. Maybe her stomach wasn't used to the richness of the meals. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was all in her head. But deep down, she knew better. Helen smiled warmly as she placed a bowl of steaming stew in front of Anna. "I made your favorite tonight, sweetheart," she said. "You always say you love my beef stew." Anna forced a smile. "Thank you, Helen. It smells wonderful." She picked up her spoon and stirred the thick broth, watching chunks of meat and vegetables swirl in the dark sauce. The family was already digging in: Daniel across from her, his father, Mark, at the head of the table, and Daniel's younger sister, Claire, beside her. She took the first bite. The stew was rich, flavorful, perfectly seasoned. But before she could swallow, a strange sensation crept up her throat. Her stomach twisted. A wave of nausea hit her so hard she almost dropped her spoon. The warmth in the room suddenly felt suffocating, the chatter around her distant. Not again. She tried to steady her breathing, but her body betrayed her. Sweat broke out on her forehead, her fingers trembling as she placed the spoon down. Her vision blurred for a moment, and a sharp pain coiled in her stomach, twisting tighter with each second. Daniel noticed first. "Anna? Are you okay?" His voice was soft, but she could hear the concern in it. She swallowed, forcing a weak smile. I just need some air." Slowly, she pushed back her chair, careful not to show how unsteady her legs felt. Every movement sent a fresh wave of nausea through her body, but she held it together until she reached the bathroom. The moment she locked the door, she collapsed against the sink, gripping the cold porcelain as if it could anchor her. She looked up at the mirror. Her face was pale, her skin damp with sweat. Her breathing was ragged. She turned on the tap, splashing cold water on her face, trying to shake off the dizziness. This wasn't normal. She had been sick after nearly every meal at her in-laws' house, but the symptoms were getting worse. At first, it had been mild nausea. Then stomach cramps. Then dizziness. And now this unbearable sickness that made her feel like she was on the verge of passing out. What was happening to her? A soft knock on the door made her jump. "Anna?" It was Daniel. "Are you okay?" She hesitated. Should she tell him? Would he even believe her? "I'll be out in a second," she called, forcing her voice to stay steady. She needed time to think. That night, as she lay in bed beside Daniel, she replayed every Sunday dinner in her mind. She had eaten different dishes each time, so it wasn't a specific ingredient. No one else ever got sick, just her. Then a thought struck her. What if it wasn't the food? What if it was meant for her? Her pulse quickened. No. That was crazy. Helen was always kind to her. Mark treated her like a daughter. Claire was like a younger sister. Why would they want to hurt her? And yet, the next Sunday, she made a decision. She would bring her own food. Just to see. If she still got sick, then maybe it was something else, an allergy she hadn't noticed, or just her anxiety playing tricks on her. But if she didn't, then she'd have her answer. The following Sunday, Anna arrived at her in-laws' house carrying a small insulated container in her purse. She had cooked the meal herself, plain chicken and rice, nothing heavy, nothing seasoned too much. She made sure Daniel didn't see it. Dinner was already set when they arrived. Helen beamed at her. "I made lasagna tonight, dear. I remember you saying you love Italian food." Anna smiled, her heart pounding. "That sounds delicious." She sat down, her stomach tightening, not from hunger, but from nerves. Everyone started serving themselves. Anna discreetly reached into her bag, pulling out the container. She placed it on the table and opened the lid. Daniel frowned. "What's that?" "I've been having some stomach issues lately," she said, keeping her tone light. "Doctor suggested I stick to something simple for a while." Helen's expression didn't change. But her eyes, they flickered for a fraction of a second. Mark chuckled. "Well, that's a shame. Helen's lasagna is the best." Anna smiled politely. "I know. I'll have some once I feel better." She took a bite of her own meal, chewing carefully. The conversation around the table continued, laughter filling the room. She felt fine. For the first time in months, she ate dinner at her in-laws' house without feeling like she was about to collapse. No nausea. No dizziness. No stomach cramps. Her chest tightened. The truth hit her like ice water. It was the food. And someone was doing this to her. She placed her fork down, her hands trembling slightly. She glanced up, scanning the faces around the table. Daniel was talking to his father, unaware. Claire was scrolling through her phone. Helen was watching her. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Anna knew. Helen knew what she had done. But the real question was, why? Anna forced a smile as she wiped her mouth with a napkin, her hands trembling under the table. The warmth of the room felt suffocating, the air thick with something she couldn't name. She had expected relief when she finally confirmed her suspicion. Instead, dread settled deep in her bones. Someone, no, Helen, was doing this to her. But why? Her mind raced with possibilities. Had she done something wrong? Had she unknowingly offended her mother-in-law? Was this about control? Or was it something worse? Helen's eyes flickered to her plate before she quickly looked away, continuing to chat with Daniel and Mark as if nothing had happened. But Anna had seen it. That moment of recognition. That tiny shift in her expression. Helen knew. Anna barely touched the rest of her meal, her appetite long gone. She needed to leave, needed space to think. After dinner, Helen stood and started collecting plates. "Anna, sweetheart, could you help me in the kitchen?" Anna hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to say no. But refusing might make things worse. Of course. She pushed her chair back, glancing at Daniel, who was laughing at something Mark had said. He hadn't noticed her unease. The kitchen was quiet, the clatter of dishes the only sound as Helen moved efficiently, rinsing plates and stacking them in the sink. Anna stood beside her, unsure what to say. Then Helen spoke, her voice soft. "You didn't eat much tonight." Anna's breath caught in her throat. "I guess my stomach's been off lately," she said carefully. "I didn't want to risk it getting worse." Helen nodded slowly, scrubbing a dish. "That's smart." She rinsed it, placing it in the drying rack. "But you know, dear, you shouldn't be too worried. Our family has strong stomachs." Anna swallowed. "I suppose so." Helen turned to face her, drying her hands with a towel. Her expression was unreadable. "I hope you don't think I'd ever serve you something that would make you sick." Anna's chest tightened. There it was. A test. Helen was watching her, waiting for a reaction. Anna forced out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "Of course not. That never even crossed my mind." Helen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm glad to hear that. Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Anna quickly grabbed a dish and started scrubbing, pretending to be focused. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Helen knew. And now Helen knew that she knew. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Anna kept her composure, smiling when expected, laughing when appropriate. But inside, panic clawed at her chest. She needed to talk to Daniel. When they finally got home, she closed the bedroom door behind them, taking a deep breath. Daniel. He was already pulling off his watch, looking tired. Yeah. She hesitated, trying to find the right words. Have you ever noticed anything strange about your mom? Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Anna's hands curled into fists. How could she say it? How could she tell him that the woman who had raised him, who had loved him his whole life, was poisoning his wife? She had no proof. Nothing except her own experience. If she accused Helen outright, Daniel might not believe her. So she took a different approach. I mean, I've been getting sick after eating at their house, she said carefully. It happens every time. But tonight, I brought my own food, and I felt fine. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Anna, you know how stressed you've been lately. Maybe it's just nerves. Or maybe your body is just sensitive to different spices. Anna exhaled sharply. It's not nerves, Daniel. He looked at her, confusion in his eyes. Then what are you saying? She hesitated. If she said too much, he'd push back. If she said too little, he wouldn't understand. So she settled on, I think something is wrong. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I get it. You don't feel good after eating there. But accusing my mom of, what, deliberately making you sick? Come on, Anna, that's crazy. She clenched her jaw. I didn't say that. But you're thinking it. Silence filled the room. Anna turned away, pressing her fingers against her temples. Forget it, she muttered. Daniel sighed again, stepping closer. Look, I love you. And I love my family. Maybe next time, we can just eat before we go over, all right? Anna nodded, but inside, she knew the truth. Eating before the visit wouldn't solve anything. Because Helen wasn't just trying to make her sick. Helen was testing her. And now that she had passed the test, the real game would begin. Anna barely slept that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts tangled in fear and doubt. The house felt too quiet, as if something was waiting in the dark. Daniel's breathing was steady beside her, completely at peace. He didn't believe her. Or worse, he didn't want to. She couldn't blame him. What kind of person would want to think that their own mother was capable of something so sinister? But Anna knew what she had felt. She had spent weeks curled up in pain after every dinner at the in-laws' house. The dizziness, the nausea, the exhaustion, it wasn't in her head. And now, after bringing her own food, she had proof. Helen was doing something to her meals. And she knew that Anna was onto her. A shiver ran through Anna's spine. What happens now? Would Helen stop? Or would she get bolder? Anna wasn't sure she wanted to find out. The next move. The next morning, she made a decision. If she couldn't convince Daniel, she needed to gather evidence. After breakfast, she sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, looking up symptoms of food poisoning. The results matched too closely. But that wasn't enough. She needed something solid. An idea sparked. She would take a sample. If she could bring home a small portion of whatever Helen served her at the next dinner, she could have it tested. If anything suspicious was found, Daniel would have no choice but to believe her. Her stomach clenched at the thought of going back there. But she had to do this. She had to know. That evening, when Daniel came home from work, he had news. "Mom invited us for dinner again on Saturday," he said casually, dropping his keys on the counter. Anna's pulse spiked. "So soon?" She forced a smile. "That sounds nice." Daniel gave her a hesitant look. "Are you sure? I don't want you stressing over this." She nodded, keeping her expression calm. "I'll be fine." Inside, her nerves were a storm. She had 3 days to prepare. Dinner with the devil. Saturday arrived too quickly. Anna tucked a small, airtight container into her purse before they left. Her heart pounded as they drove to Helen's house. When they stepped inside, the warm smell of home-cooked food wrapped around them. It should have been comforting. But to Anna, it felt like a trap. Helen greeted them with a bright smile. Too bright. "Anna, sweetheart. I made something special for you tonight." Anna's stomach turned. Helen led them to the dining room, where steaming plates of food were already set out. The meal looked delicious: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Harmless. Normal. Anna forced herself to sit, her palms sweating. Helen watched her carefully. "I hope you're hungry," she said sweetly. Anna swallowed hard. She could feel Daniel's eyes on her, waiting for her to act normally. With a deep breath, she picked up her fork and took a small bite of mashed potatoes. She had to play this carefully. She chewed slowly, pretending to enjoy it. Then, when everyone was distracted in conversation, she subtly reached for her purse under the table. She needed to take a sample without being noticed. Her hand found the container. Just as she was about to slip a spoonful of potatoes inside, Helen spoke. "Anna, dear," Helen said, her voice light but firm. "You're finally eating well tonight. That makes me happy." Anna froze. Helen's gaze was locked onto hers. She knew. Her pulse pounded so loudly she could barely hear the rest of the conversation. Helen smiled, taking a sip of her wine. "I was starting to think you didn't like my cooking." Anna's throat tightened. This wasn't just about food anymore. This was a warning. And it chilled her to the bone. Anna's hands trembled under the table. Helen knew. She wasn't just watching, she was waiting. Testing her. Anna forced a smile, gripping her fork tightly. "Of course, Helen. Your cooking is wonderful." Helen's lips curled slightly. "I'm so glad to hear that." Anna forced herself to take another bite, but she barely tasted it. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to get out. She couldn't take the sample now. Helen's eyes never left her. She had to be careful. If Helen was willing to poison her food, what else was she capable of? A silent warning. The rest of dinner dragged on in tense conversation. Helen laughed and chatted as if nothing was wrong, but Anna felt the unspoken threat behind every word. When they finally got up from the table, Helen reached for Anna's plate. "I'll take care of this," she said smoothly. Anna's stomach dropped. Helen was making sure she had no way to take a sample. Panic clawed at her throat, but she forced herself to stay calm. She wasn't going to outplay Helen in one night. This was a long game. A desperate plan. The car ride home was silent. Daniel finally sighed. "You were quiet tonight." Anna hesitated. If she told him about Helen's warning, he'd brush it off. He'd say she was imagining things. She needed proof. "I was just tired," she lied. Daniel nodded, relieved. "I'm glad you're starting to relax. Maybe now we can move on from this." Anna didn't answer. Move on? Not until she knew the truth. That night, she stayed up searching online for private labs that tested food. If she couldn't take a sample from dinner, she needed another way. She thought about Helen's kitchen. There had to be something there. A spice jar. A container. Anything. But sneaking into Helen's house wasn't an option. Unless. She stared at her phone. What if she made an excuse to visit during the day? Maybe she could borrow something from Helen's pantry. It was risky. But it might be the only way. Into the lion's den. The next morning, Anna called Helen. "Hi, Helen," she said, keeping her voice light. "I was wondering if I could stop by today. I wanted to learn your mashed potatoes recipe. Daniel loved them." There was a pause. Then Helen laughed. "Oh, how sweet. Of course, dear. Come by any time." Anna's fingers tightened around the phone. Helen sounded normal. Friendly. But Anna knew better now. She wasn't walking into a kitchen. She was walking into a trap. Anna gripped the steering wheel, her fingers cold and clammy despite the warm morning sun. She stared at Helen's house, neat, elegant, welcoming to anyone who didn't know better. But Anna knew better now. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. She needed to get inside, get a sample of something, anything, that would prove her suspicions. Helen was poisoning her food. Daniel wouldn't believe her without proof. She had already tried to explain the pattern, but he dismissed it as stress, as paranoia. But this wasn't paranoia. Anna knew what she felt. She had no choice but to walk straight into danger. A friendly face with dark intentions. She stepped out of the car and walked up to the door, plastering a polite smile on her face. When she knocked, it opened almost immediately. Helen's warm, practiced smile greeted her. "Anna. So lovely to see you." Anna forced a cheerful nod. "I've been craving your mashed potatoes ever since the last dinner. Thought I'd stop by and learn your secret." Helen's smile deepened, but something flickered in her eyes, something calculating. "Oh, that's wonderful," she said smoothly. "Come in, dear." Anna stepped inside, her pulse hammering. The house smelled of spices and roasted herbs, but now, that comforting scent felt suffocating. Helen led her to the kitchen, and Anna took in every detail. The marble countertops gleamed. Fresh vegetables sat in a neat bowl. But she wasn't here for those. She was here for what couldn't be seen. Playing along. Helen moved around the kitchen effortlessly, gathering ingredients. "Peel these, will you?" she said, handing Anna a few potatoes and a peeler. Anna nodded, sitting at the counter. Her hands worked automatically, but her mind raced. She needed to find something suspicious. She casually glanced around, spotting the spice rack near the stove. Jars, neatly labeled, arranged by size. Seasoning salt. Garlic powder. Oregano. If Helen was adding something to the food, was it here? Or did she keep it somewhere hidden? Helen was humming softly as she prepared a pot of water, seemingly relaxed. But Anna wasn't fooled. Helen was watching. Waiting. Testing her. A dangerous move. Anna made her decision. She dropped her peeler onto the floor with a loud clatter. "Oh. Sorry about that," she said quickly, bending down to pick it up. Helen chuckled. "No problem at all." Anna moved quickly. While crouched, she extended her free hand toward the spice rack, fingers closing around the small jar labeled seasoning salt. She twisted the lid open. A bitter, chemical-like smell hit her nose. Her stomach turned. This wasn't just salt. This was something else. Before she could react, Helen's voice cut through the air. "Looking for something?" Anna's body went rigid. She turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Helen stood behind her, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Anna forced a laugh. "Oh, just curious what spices you use." I like to see how everything comes together." Helen didn't blink. Then, she reached forward, taking the jar from Anna's hand. "A little secret ingredient," she murmured, twisting the lid back on with a soft click. "Just a touch makes all the difference." Anna swallowed hard. That wasn't an answer. That was a warning, the shift in the game. Helen placed the jar back on the rack, her hand lingering over it for a second too long. Then, as if nothing had happened, she turned back to the stove. "Well," she said brightly, "let's get back to cooking, shall we?" Anna nodded stiffly, but inside, she was screaming. Helen knew. She had been caught snooping, and now Helen was toying with her, just like a predator with its prey. The worst part? Helen didn't seem worried. If she was poisoning the food, why wasn't she afraid of Anna figuring it out? Did she believe Anna couldn't stop her? Or worse, did she already have something planned? Anna's hands shook as she continued peeling, but she knew one thing for sure, she had to get out of there. And fast. The escape plan. As Helen moved around the kitchen, Anna took slow, steady breaths, trying to calm herself. Her chance to take the spice jar had passed. Helen would be watching now. But she couldn't leave empty-handed. She needed another plan. Her gaze flickered toward the trash can. Maybe. She forced herself to relax. "Could I throw this away?" she asked, holding up a potato peel. Helen glanced at her. "Of course. Right under the sink." Anna walked over, lifting the lid. Her heart pounded as she spotted something inside: crumpled paper towels, food scraps, and a small plastic packet. It was torn open, its contents mostly gone. But there was just enough left. Anna moved quickly, grabbing a handful of potato peels and, in the same motion, scooping the packet into her palm. She shoved it deep into her pocket before Helen could see. Then, with a practiced smile, she dusted off her hands. "All done," she said. Helen smiled approvingly. "Good girl. Now, let's mash those potatoes." Anna's stomach churned, but she forced herself to keep playing along. She had what she needed. She just had to get out alive. Anna clutched the small plastic packet inside her pocket, her pulse hammering in her ears. She had what she needed, evidence. But she wasn't safe yet. Helen continued cooking, moving around the kitchen like nothing had happened. But Anna knew better. Helen was watching her. Testing her. Waiting for her to slip. Anna forced herself to stay calm. She needed to leave before Helen grew suspicious, before she had time to do anything. But she couldn't just bolt out the door. That would make it obvious. She had to be careful. A polite exit. Anna took a slow breath and forced a smile. "You know, I just remembered, I left my phone in the car," she said, feigning an embarrassed chuckle. "I should grab it before I forget." Helen's expression didn't change, but Anna saw it, the subtle flicker in her eyes, the slight pause before she responded. "Of course, dear," Helen said smoothly, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "Go ahead." Anna nodded, keeping her pace steady as she walked toward the door. Every step felt like walking on a tightrope. The second she stepped outside, she let out a silent breath. She needed to get this packet tested. She needed to know what Helen was putting in her food. Anna slid into the driver's seat and pulled out her phone, ready to call someone, anyone, for help. But before she could dial, she froze. Helen was standing in the doorway, watching her. Smiling. A deadly game. Anna swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel. Helen tilted her head slightly, then gave a small wave before turning back inside. The door shut behind her. Anna sat there for a long moment, her body frozen. That smile. It wasn't warm. It wasn't friendly. It was a warning. Helen knew. Somehow, she knew. And now, Anna was in danger. The search for answers. Anna forced herself to drive away at a normal pace, even though her instinct screamed at her to speed off. She couldn't risk making Helen more suspicious. She needed help. But who would believe her? Daniel had already dismissed her concerns before. If she told him Helen had been poisoning her, would he finally listen? Or would he call her paranoid again? Anna gritted her teeth. She couldn't afford to wait for Daniel to come around. She needed proof, real, undeniable proof. And she knew exactly where to get it. The lab results. Anna drove straight to the one place she knew could help, a small, private lab downtown. She rushed inside, her hands trembling as she pulled out the plastic packet. "I need this tested," she told the technician at the front desk. The woman gave her a curious look. "For what?" Anna hesitated, then lowered her voice. I think it's poison." The technician's expression shifted. She took the packet carefully. "We can run a toxicology test, but it'll take at least 24 hours. Anna's stomach sank. That was too long. But she had no choice. "Okay," she whispered. "Please, just call me the second you have results." The technician nodded. Of course. Anna left the lab, her mind racing. Now, all she could do was wait. A sinister invitation. That night, Anna lay in bed, her thoughts tangled in fear and uncertainty. She checked her phone for the 10th time, no missed calls. She was trapped in limbo, knowing she was being poisoned but unable to prove it yet. Then, her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Helen's making dinner tomorrow. She wants you to come." Anna's blood turned to ice. Helen was inviting her over. She knew Anna had been snooping. And now, she was calling her back. For what? Anna's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Every instinct screamed at her to say no. But if she refused, Helen would know for sure that she was onto her. And if Helen felt cornered, there was no telling what she would do next. Anna clenched her jaw and typed a response. "I'll be there." Then she put down her phone and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, she was walking straight into the lion's den. And she had no idea if she'd come out alive. Anna stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. Her face was pale, her hands ice cold. Tonight, she would walk into Helen's house knowing the truth. Helen had been poisoning her. She still didn't have the lab results, but she didn't need them anymore. The signs were all there. Helen's controlling nature, the way she watched Anna eat, the faint smirk whenever she finished a plate. And now, after Anna had taken the evidence, Helen had invited her over. It was a warning. Or worse, a trap. Anna took a slow, shaky breath. She had to go. If she refused, Helen would know she was onto her. And Anna wasn't ready for whatever Helen might do if she felt exposed. But she wasn't going in unprepared. She reached into her purse and pulled out a tiny recording device. She had bought it this morning, just in case. If Helen slipped up, if she admitted anything, Anna would have proof. She clipped the device to the inside of her purse, grabbed her coat, and walked out the door. Tonight, she was playing Helen's game. But this time, she wasn't going to lose. The dinner begins. The house smelled too good when Anna stepped inside. Roasted chicken. Buttered vegetables. Steaming mashed potatoes. A feast. Helen greeted her with her usual warm smile, but Anna wasn't fooled. "Anna, dear. I'm so glad you could make it." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were sharp, studying every inch of Anna's face. Anna forced herself to smile. Wouldn't miss it. Daniel was already at the table, scrolling on his phone. He barely glanced up. Helen gestured to a chair. Sit. I made all your favorites. Anna's stomach twisted. Of course, she did. She took her seat and glanced at her plate. Everything looked perfect. But now she knew better. Helen set a steaming plate in front of her, then poured a glass of water. Eat up, she said with a soft smile. Anna picked up her fork, her hand steady even though her heart was racing. This was it. She had to make Helen think she was eating. Anna cut into the chicken and lifted a bite to her lips, but at the last second, she knocked her water glass over. The cold liquid spilled across the table, rushing toward Helen's lap. Oh no! Anna gasped. Helen jumped up, grabbing a napkin. Anna took her chance. With quick, practiced movements, she dropped the piece of chicken into her napkin and slid it into her purse. Helen turned back, her smile thin. Clumsy, dear? Anna forced a laugh. Guess so. She reached for another bite but, accidentally, dropped it. Then she pushed the food around her plate, taking fake sips of water. She was not letting Helen win tonight. A confession in the dark. Dinner dragged on, and Anna played her part perfectly. When Helen finally cleared the dishes, Anna let out a silent breath. She had made it through. Or so she thought. Stay back a moment, dear, Helen said sweetly. I have something for you. Anna's stomach clenched. Daniel was still sitting at the table, glued to his phone. If something happened, would he even notice? Helen led Anna into the kitchen, away from Daniel's sight. Then, she turned to face her. I know what you did, Helen said softly. Anna froze. Helen took a step closer, her smile never faltering. You think you're so clever, don't you? Coming here, pretending? Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Anna's mouth went dry. I don't know what you mean. Helen chuckled. Oh, sweetheart. I always know. Her voice was sickly sweet, her gaze cold as ice. I've taken care of my family for years. Everything I do is for them. And I won't let you ruin that. Anna's heart pounded. Ruin what? She whispered. Helen leaned in. You never belonged here. You never fit in. Her voice dropped lower. You're weak, Anna. That's why you keep getting sick. Anna's breath hitched. This was it. Helen had all but admitted it. Anna tightened her grip on her purse, praying the recorder was catching everything. Then Helen did something that sent ice through Anna's veins. She smiled again. And then she whispered. You won't be leaving tonight. Anna's breath came in short, shallow bursts. Helen's words echoed in her ears, you won't be leaving tonight. For a moment, she couldn't move. Then, survival instinct kicked in. She took a slow step back, gripping her purse tightly, her fingers brushing against the recording device. Helen tilted her head, eyes gleaming with something dark and unreadable. No need to look so scared, dear, she cooed. I only mean that you should rest. You haven't been well. Anna's mind raced. She's trying to trap me here. Helen's calmness was worse than anger. It meant she was confident. It meant she had a plan. Anna needed to act fast. She forced a weak smile. You're right. I do feel a little dizzy. Helen nodded approvingly. Let me get you some tea. It'll help. Anna swallowed. That tea would be her last drink if she let this continue, the escape plan. Anna's heart pounded as Helen walked toward the stove. The teapot sat there, ready. How long has she been planning this? Anna glanced toward the dining room. Daniel was still there, scrolling through his phone. Would he help her if she ran? Or would he still defend his mother? Helen turned back, her face calm. I'll add some honey. It's good for the nerves. Anna had seconds to decide. She reached into her purse and hit play on the recording. Helen's own voice filled the air. "You won't be leaving tonight." Helen froze. Her eyes snapped to Anna, and for the first time, her mask cracked. Anna saw something behind them, pure, uncontrolled rage. She knows she's trapped. Anna stepped back, gripping the purse. "You poisoned me." Helen's lips pressed together. "Lower your voice, dear. I have it all recorded." Helen inhaled sharply. "That's ridiculous." Anna took another step toward the door. "I'm leaving. If you try to stop me, I'll call the police." Helen's hands clenched at her sides. Anna didn't wait. She turned and ran. The final confrontation. Daniel looked up just as Anna burst into the dining room. "Daniel." Helen was right behind her. Daniel frowned. "What's going on?" Anna didn't hesitate. She hit play again. Helen's words echoed through the room. "You never belonged here. You're weak, Anna. That's why you keep getting sick. You won't be leaving tonight." Daniel's face changed. For the first time, he really looked at Anna. Then, slowly, he turned to his mother. "Mom?" Helen's face remained eerily calm. "She's twisting my words." Anna's fingers tightened around her phone. "I'm going to the hospital. I'll have my blood tested. If anything shows up, this recording goes to the police." Helen's expression didn't change. Daniel looked between them, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Anna didn't wait. She grabbed her coat and bolted for the door. The aftermath. Anna drove straight to the hospital. Hours later, she had the results. Poison. Not enough to kill instantly. But a slow, steady dose, just enough to weaken her. Enough to make her doubt herself. Enough to keep her trapped. She sent the results and the recording to the police. By morning, Helen was in custody. Daniel never called her again. She didn't care. She was free, but as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, one question still haunted her. Why? Why had Helen done it? Why had she hated her so much? Anna would never get a real answer. And maybe that was the scariest part of all. Final lesson: the unseen dangers. Anna's story was a chilling reminder: sometimes, the greatest dangers aren't strangers. They're the people who smile at you. The ones who cook your meals. The ones who pretend to care. And sometimes, survival isn't about running from monsters. It's about recognizing the devil behind the mask. Anna sat in the dim light of her apartment, her fingers pressing into the fabric of the couch beneath her, as her mind raced. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room, but her thoughts were far from quiet. They were a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and a deep, unshakable sense of betrayal. She couldn't quite shake the feeling of helplessness that had clung to her in the days since she left Helen's house. The tests. The confirmation of poisoning. She had fought for her life, survived against an enemy she hadn't even known was there, but it felt as if something far more profound had been taken from her. Anna leaned forward and picked up her phone, staring at the blank screen. There were still messages from Daniel, the ones he had sent after the confrontation. At first, she had been too angry to read them. Then, too numb. Now, they were nothing but reminders of a life she had once imagined was stable, simple, full of hope and shared plans. Why had I never seen it? She asked herself for the 100th time. How had Helen, a woman who had always appeared so friendly, so concerned, managed to weave her poison so seamlessly into Anna's life? But what unsettled her more than the physical harm was the emotional toll. She had believed Helen to be a mother figure, someone who had offered advice, support, and, in her twisted way, protection. And Daniel. Anna had trusted him too. How could he not have seen what was happening? How could he have ignored the subtle signs, the bruises that were invisible to anyone who didn't look closely enough? She rubbed her face, wiping away a tear that threatened to fall. She couldn't even remember the last time she had allowed herself to cry. I should feel relief now, she thought. I should be celebrating my freedom, my survival. And yet, she felt empty. The battle had been won, but the scars remained. As the sun began to set, the soft golden light filtering through her window seemed to mock her, casting long shadows across the room. The shadows of the past, of a life that was no longer hers. She had survived, yes. But now, she was left to rebuild. Where would she even begin? Her mind wandered back to the confrontation at Helen's house, the final moments before she had run for her life. She could still hear the coldness in Helen's voice as she spoke, that chilling sense of control in her words. You won't be leaving tonight. Even now, Anna could feel the weight of those words pressing against her chest. It was a moment she would never forget. The moment she realized that Helen had never cared for her, had never been her ally, despite everything Anna had thought. There had been no concern for her health, no motherly love. It had all been a game to Helen, a cruel, twisted game. Anna leaned back against the couch and closed her eyes. She could still see the way Helen had moved so calmly toward the stove, preparing the tea as though nothing was amiss. As though this was just another day in the life. Anna's stomach had twisted in that moment, and her body had frozen in terror. But then something had shifted in her. Survival instinct. She had grabbed the recording device in her purse and hit play. The sound of Helen's own voice, "You won't be leaving tonight," had cut through the tension like a knife. Helen had been caught. For a moment, there had been no denying the truth. The way her face had shifted, the fleeting flicker of rage in her eyes, had told Anna everything she needed to know. Helen had known she was trapped. But what still puzzled Anna was the question that loomed like a dark cloud over everything. Why? Why had Helen done it? Why had she slowly poisoned her, undermining her health, her sense of self? What had Anna ever done to deserve such cruelty? Was it simply a matter of control, of power over someone weaker, someone who would never suspect her? Or was there something deeper, something more sinister driving Helen's actions? The truth was, Anna would probably never know. And that was the hardest part to accept, the uncertainty. Helen's motives would remain a mystery, a riddle that could never be solved. But what haunted Anna more than anything was the possibility that Daniel might never have understood the gravity of the situation. Had he known? Anna wondered, staring out the window. Had he always known something was wrong, but chose to turn a blind eye? She had confronted him, had shown him the evidence, but he hadn't responded. His silence had been deafening. A faint knock on the door pulled Anna from her reverie. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone, and she certainly didn't feel ready to face anyone, especially not Daniel. But the knock came again, more insistent this time. Anna stood slowly, her legs still weak from the emotional toll of the last few days. She walked to the door, her steps heavy, and when she reached for the handle, she hesitated. Her hand hovered for a long moment, and then, with a deep breath, she opened it. Standing there was Daniel. His face was pale, his eyes swollen, and the dark circles beneath them only emphasized the anguish etched into his features. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of what had happened and the uncertainty of what might happen next. "Anna," Daniel finally said, his voice broken, "can we talk?" Anna's heart pounded as she stepped back, her mind racing. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him how betrayed she felt, how angry she was that he hadn't stood up for her when she needed him most. But instead, she simply nodded, stepping aside to let him in. He entered slowly, his gaze shifting uneasily around the apartment, as if looking for something to ground him. But nothing could ground him now. Not after everything that had happened. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have known. I should have believed you from the start." Anna felt a knot tighten in her chest. Should have believed me? He hadn't just failed to believe her, he had stayed silent. He had chosen to remain passive, to side with the woman who had been poisoning his girlfriend for months. The betrayal was more than she could bear. "You should have," she whispered. Her voice cracked, and she quickly wiped away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. "I was so blinded by her," Daniel continued, his hands trembling slightly as he reached out, but Anna pulled back, not ready for the comfort he might offer. "I didn't want to believe it. But when I heard the recording, when I heard her words, I realized how wrong I was. I've been so stupid, Anna." She turned away from him, unable to look him in the eye. The pain of everything that had happened was too much. "You let her do this to me," she said, her voice barely audible. "You stood by and did nothing." Daniel's expression shifted from guilt to desperation. I know, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I want to make things right. I want to be here for you. I'll do anything." Anna felt her chest tighten as his words washed over her, but they didn't reach her heart. He had failed her at the most crucial moment, and now, he was standing in front of her asking for forgiveness. Was it too late? Could she really trust him again? "I don't know if I can believe you, Daniel," she whispered. "You chose your mother over me." "I didn't choose her, Anna. I was just so afraid of what would happen if I confronted her. I didn't know how to fight her. But now, I see it clearly. I see everything clearly." Anna felt the tears welling up again, but she refused to let them fall. She wasn't going to break. Not now. Not after everything she had been through. "I need time," she said, her voice firm. "I need time to figure out what I want. I can't just forgive you just like that. You've broken my trust. I don't know if it can ever be repaired." Daniel stood there, his eyes filled with anguish, but he didn't argue. Instead, he nodded, as though he had already accepted the possibility of losing her. "I understand," he whispered. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I'm here, whenever you're ready. I'll wait." Anna didn't say anything. She couldn't. She just stepped back and closed the door softly, leaving Daniel on the other side. The silence that followed was deafening, and as she leaned against the door, her heart felt heavy, like an anchor dragging her down. But as she stood there, alone once again, one thing was clear: the journey to healing was just beginning. And she wasn't sure if Daniel would be a part of that journey, or if he had already become a shadow of the past. The weeks following that night were a blur. Anna felt like she was floating in some hazy space between the past and an uncertain future. The tension in her chest had become a constant companion, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her as she tried to pick up the scattered pieces of her life. She had been poisoned, physically, emotionally, and mentally, and now, she was left with the aftermath. She didn't want to be a victim, but every time she looked in the mirror, the face staring back at her felt like a stranger. The woman who had walked out of that house, that prison, was someone different. Stronger, yes. But wounded. Always wounded. Anna spent her days going through the motions: work, grocery shopping, and occasional conversations with her friends. But even when she smiled, it didn't quite reach her eyes. She had told her friends what happened, but even they didn't fully understand the weight of what she had gone through. They didn't see the subtle manipulation Helen had used to entangle her, to make her feel like she was weak, like she couldn't survive without them. It wasn't just the poisoning that had hurt her. It was the emotional damage, the gaslighting. The slow, insidious way Helen had chipped away at her sense of self-worth. Anna had learned a hard lesson: trust was a fragile thing. And once it was broken, it was difficult, if not impossible, to rebuild. But what scared her the most was the question she had been avoiding. Could she ever trust Daniel again? She hadn't seen him since the night of the confrontation. The look in his eyes, the tears, the pleading, had shaken her. But his absence in the weeks that followed had spoken louder than any words could. If he really cared, if he truly understood the gravity of what had happened, why hadn't he reached out? Why hadn't he shown up at her door again, to prove he was willing to fight for her? To show her that he understood the depths of the pain she had endured, but as much as she wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the bitterness of betrayal, Anna couldn't ignore the sliver of doubt that crept into her mind. Had Daniel really known? Had he been too afraid of confronting his mother, too afraid of the consequences of standing up to her? Or had he simply been blind to the truth? The problem was that Anna didn't have the answers. And without answers, she couldn't make a decision. She couldn't move forward. Not yet. Anna was sitting at her kitchen table one evening, going through the paperwork for her hospital bills, when she heard a soft knock on her door. For a moment, she froze. Her heart skipped a beat, and her thoughts immediately flashed to Daniel. Could it be him? She stood up slowly, walking to the door with a sense of apprehension growing in her chest. She didn't know if she was ready to face him yet. She didn't know if she ever would be. When she opened the door, she was surprised to see a different face, a familiar one. But not the one she was expecting. It was a police officer, a woman in her early 30s with short brown hair and a calm, professional demeanor. "Anna Knight?" the officer asked, her voice gentle but firm. "Yes, that's me. Is everything okay?" Anna asked, her throat tight. The officer gave her a small nod. "I'm Detective Miller. I'm handling the case involving Helen Taylor. I just wanted to check in with you and see how you're doing, now that the investigation is over." Anna swallowed hard. She hadn't expected to hear from the police again. Helen's arrest had seemed like a distant event, something that was behind her now, but the detective's presence reminded her that the process wasn't as simple as it seemed. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about dealing with the long-term consequences of what had happened. I'm doing better," Anna said, trying to sound calm, even though her heart was racing. "I'm still processing everything, but I'm okay." "I'm glad to hear that," Detective Miller said, giving her a sympathetic smile. "Helen is currently awaiting trial, but we have enough evidence to ensure she won't be able to harm anyone else. I just wanted to check in and make sure you're all right. If there's anything we can do to assist you during this time, don't hesitate to let us know." Anna nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and discomfort. Helen was behind bars, and the police were handling everything, but a small part of her still wondered if justice would ever feel complete. Could anything truly make up for the emotional devastation Helen had caused? The wreckage of her trust, her sense of safety, could those things ever be fully repaired? "Thank you," Anna said quietly. "I appreciate it." Detective Miller gave her one last nod before walking away, leaving Anna standing in the doorway, feeling a strange mix of closure and emptiness. As the officer disappeared down the hall, Anna closed the door slowly and leaned against it. She wasn't sure how she felt about Helen's arrest. It should have felt like a victory, but it didn't. The truth was that Helen's actions had irrevocably changed her. And maybe that was the hardest thing to accept. She wasn't the same person she had been before. The next few weeks passed by in a blur of appointments, therapy sessions, and conversations with people who genuinely cared about her, her friends, her coworkers, and even the occasional phone call from her mother. But still, the absence of Daniel weighed heavily on her heart. She couldn't help but think about what might have been, what could have been. Could she ever truly forgive him? Could she trust him again after he had let her down when she needed him most? Her therapist had been the one to tell her that healing wasn't just about surviving, it was about learning to let go. Letting go of the past. Letting go of the anger. And sometimes, that meant letting go of people, even people you once loved. Do you feel like you've truly let go of him yet? Dr. Williams had asked during one of their sessions. Anna hesitated. I don't know if I can. I want to. But I don't know if I can ever look at him the same way again. I'm scared that if I let him back in, it will all happen again. Dr. Williams had nodded thoughtfully. Trust is fragile. It's normal to be afraid. But forgiveness isn't about saying that everything is okay. It's about releasing yourself from the hold that person has on you. Sometimes, the only way to truly move forward is to accept that you may never have all the answers. It had been hard to hear those words, but they stuck with Anna. They echoed in her mind long after the session ended. She couldn't control what had happened with Daniel. She couldn't change the fact that he had failed her when she needed him most. But what she could do was take the next step in her own healing. Anna was beginning to understand that forgiveness wasn't for Daniel, it was for her. She had to forgive herself for trusting the wrong people, for ignoring the signs, for letting herself fall into a web of manipulation. But she also had to forgive Daniel. For the sake of her own peace. She was beginning to realize that, in order to truly move forward, she had to trust again. And this time, it had to be with herself.